Enjoyed that 1 to 2 minutes that you had to yourself. It is now my pleasure to bring up the next speaker. He's investment principal at Consensus. He's going to be talking to us about debt-based finance. This is Praneeth Srikanti. Praneeth, you can just share your screen and open your camera up whenever you feel ready. The floor is yours.
Awesome, cool. Very, very glad to meet you all. And yeah, when Eden first spoke about organizing CSCON as an event where people would be sharing knowledge and would actually use that as a basis to kind of build a better understanding of the ecosystem that CheatSafe has kind of been cultivating, I thought this was perfect. Just wondering how best to kind of position myself as in terms of the content that I was presenting, but hopefully this session might just be helpful in provoking a few thoughts, and would actually love to hear your feedback on a few thoughts that I've been having in these directions. And so so I just decided to let me know if you can see what I'm sharing. Am I, or is that visible or not? I'm not sure if that is the case, but I suppose it is. So let's probably go ahead. But just to kind of give a brief introduction, so I'm with Consensus Labs in the venture investment unit in Consensus, and we are an early stage investment firm backing projects in the Web3 space that are looking to scale and bring more adoption in general, and are also very proud investors in ChainSafe, and I'm a huge supporter of the work that they've been doing to date. So as part of that, I wanted to start thinking about the nature of financing that we typically use in early projects in the Web3 space, in the Web2 space, and really start thinking about why we've been having more equity-like notions of financing that we typically associate, be it with governance or with the notion of economics that kind of flow down to some part of the native tokens that each project typically embodies. And maybe starting to switch gears and think about why are we not using debt financing, and can we kind of do something along those lines which can potentially get us in a shape to use this construct. So the primary, I guess the important thing to realize is that debt as itself has been primarily a social construct. So starting from even 5,000 years back in the Sumerian civilization or in the Indus Valley civilization, what really happened was commerce and events like taxation were really obligations between different parties of creditors and debtors. And these obligations were recorded in the form of these wooden tally sticks or these ivory blocks. And these were essentially the first expressions or a form of debt that was kind of used prior to even things like cash and barter systems. And these slowly became more negotiable instruments which could function as money in some context. And so modern monetary theory does kind of speak about how a lot of money that we see today is essentially an expression of a denomination of debt or credit in some sense. And that is really what we've migrated to since the Nixon shock in '71 in some aspect. And so and there's actually a very fascinating paper by an economist, Barry Merlin, who kind of suggests, I mean, this has been suggested before about how money and credits have been interchangeable, but he kind of presents this in the notion of having a hierarchy of assets, and starting to think about those as, I guess, central bank issued, should we say, fiat in some aspect, sitting at the second rung below asset-backed securities in some aspect, like gold. And then you kind of have deposits in banks, and then you kind of have securities. And the lower down the stack you end up going, I guess the more money actually starts looking like an obligation, so to speak. And I guess, I mean, it's something that is so fundamental to people to have these obligations, and it's so easy to construct that the notion of equity only really came about in the Middle Ages. I think with equity laws in England that were kind of backed to provide land-based financing and whatnot. And so debt financing at its core is really an obligation. It's an obligation to kind of to another party about, and in most cases it typically has to deal with capital in some regards, some principle that was owed to a debtor. And the terms that you associate with that condition in terms of how you pay back this capital, how much more you kind of pay back on the same, and within which duration you kind of do this. And so for people who are creditors, the things that they look at are things along the lines of creditworthiness, whether the person I'm entering into this kind of relationship has the capability to get me back the capital that was owed, and use that also as a basis to think about the exposure or the level of risk that they would be taking on as part of their own assets or their own on their own book, so to speak, when you have the notion of wherein you have the notion of whether this instrument itself is securitizable or whether it is tokenizable in some aspect. And I could shift it off my own sheet to maybe another investor who wants exposure in the same. But at the core of all this, the key thing to think about is that debt is something that is very easy to codify. As long as you have an agreement between different parties, it's super simple to kind of to reach consensus on in some aspect, and this actually leads to a very, very simple way of structuring this. But thanks to this very simplicity that is encoded in the parameterization, you also kind of have a lot of complexity that ensures in the kind of debt that could be that could be available on market at any given point. And so I think this was actually a diagram that was released by the US Fed at some point, just speaking about all of the kinds of debt that was typically associated within the US economy at a given point, which obviously is in the trillions of dollars, if anything. And I guess a funny example is to actually think about a point in time where Apple only had one class of shares, if one might call it that, but they actually had 24 different types of corporate bonds, which kind of represent essentially debt obligations with different repayment terms, with different yields and whatnot. So, and they kind of were created to accommodate different purposes that the company had, but also to kind of accommodate the interest of people who had different preference functions in terms of the amount of exposure they wanted to these kinds of instruments in some regard. But I guess in some sense, if we kind of look at, I guess this the notion of the world as it is in some sense, what we're seeing is that there's a lot more direct to retail offerings that are happening, not just in the web. I mean, in the broader context of the financial world, there are a lot more direct to retail offerings, and we're seeing a lot of increased participation from entities and people who were not traditionally accounted for in the financial system that was kind of built up in the mid 70s and the 80s. And so a very interesting example actually being a government in Asia giving citizens the access to tokenized bonds that people could essentially end up buying on their mobile phone. And this was thanks to the notion that other players in the financial system were maybe already overburdened by things that prevented them to kind of take on this additional exposure. And we've kind of seen this trickle also in the Web3 space, where we've obviously seen throughout the years an incident, I guess, a large number of, I guess, token generation events, which we're kind of continuing to see to date in different forms. But the one thing that we're really conflating here is the notion of control in the form of governance, and the notion of economics in terms of the expected outcome that people associate with their investment. And so any form of debt financing in the real world has seen a huge amount of institutional participation, we're still not at that point in the Web3 space. What we're really seeing is only, I guess, retail participation in kind of getting access to leverage positions and potentially using that as a basis to boost their returns. But the question that I was thinking about is, why are teams of developers who are working on new features not kind of tapping into this new form of financing, one which is potentially non-dilutive, one which could be a lot more simple to express and potentially have the tastes of investors in these forms of instruments, the taste of LPs accommodated in a much better fashion, as opposed to people who kind of, like come in for a very short-term exposure and don't really have the notion of long-term capital that you need to associate with something that has more of an equity-like nature. And before I kind of delve into some brief ideas, I just wanted to actually think about all of the all of the advantages that debt typically brings, which really has these 5 core pillars that I've just kind of been speaking or referring through, and will be doing so throughout the rest of this session. The first is obviously in the simplicity that it offers in terms of how it is structured. The second aspect that I wanted to touch upon was a very interesting one, which essentially was the separation of economic and governance preferences in terms of the capability of having different people care about different things and having the capability for protocols and projects to express that in a way that was easily attributable and also kind of more transparent in terms of what this could provide. So there's different people and different entities who kind of care about the health of an ecosystem as it grows. Some of them are in it with less of a risk appetite and kind of care about more of a stable return on a specific activity that the protocol might be choosing to do. And there might be others who want to be, so to speak, long in on every aspect that the ecosystem or this protocol really concerns. And so that's maybe a simplistic way of looking at it, but that's one way of kind of thinking about the separation of those concerns. The third is something that is very positive, and which is essentially the emergence of attributable cash flows on chain, and also the capability for increased transparency that you typically see in these systems, where you can kind of track assets as they are used and spent to drive specific outcomes in these kinds of systems. And so this is a really neat way to kind of capture some part of that and build a better system of financing than what we've typically seen in the real world, and all of the shortcomings that it typically has. The fourth and the fifth are typically are more related to the notion of maybe comfort that people have with encoding debt in systems that they've used before. So you can kind of think about tokenizing debt and potentially integrating that with RFQ-based systems, or even some of the more interesting and newer AMM-based or rate-centric AMM models that are coming and being developed by teams like Yield and Notional in some aspect. But this is really a much neater and a nicer way to start thinking about providing flexibility and automation to forms of financing that I think is a crucial step that differentiates maybe Web3 from the way we've kind of done things in the world before. And so coming to the actual mechanics, I guess, I mean, this would probably just function almost very simply like a loan that you might kind of see on Aave or Compound right now, where you kind of have the capability to use or dedicate some part of the native tokens or the governance tokens that you typically have at the lowest layer, on the lowest preference layer, so to speak, as collateral against and offering this as a basis to create tokenizable LP positions in tranches of debt over that. But the key difference here would be that the notion of raising interest from LPs would actually be suited or would actually be driven towards achieving a particular outcome. And so maybe you can start thinking about the same, some of the recent activity in the DeFi space where you've seen teams like Juan essentially merge with teams from Cream and Pickle. So M&A could typically be an activity that might be responsible or used for creating a specific financing vehicle for the company to act upon. Or you could maybe start thinking about the notion where you kind of want to use this capital to drive or develop a certain set of product features that might enable better outcomes for the protocol in general, but also for the features that would actually be developed in these cases. Or maybe you could actually start thinking about doing a much more better or targeted user acquisition strategy, as opposed to kind of diluting yourself and kind of giving away a lot of the important governance tokens to ecosystem participants, and kind of diluting yourself, especially in the early stages of the program, when there might essentially be a need to kind of have more tightly guided outcomes in some aspect. But the idea would then kind of be to have these specific outcomes kind of codified, and also have these encoded as benchmarks or milestones that kind of need to be met, and use that as a basis to kind of get or attract LPs who would kind of fund these new vehicles, and use that as a basis to actually embark on these activities. And so if, for instance, I choose to do an M&A with this capital that I raise, maybe some of the benchmarks that I want to choose to look at would be like code commits from a certain set of developers across the ecosystem of repositories that I'm using, and use that as one of the criteria that I need to fulfill in order to actually get access to the capital that LPs would deposit in this tranche. And so the idea would still be that you would have some notion of a payout where all of the activity that you're driving towards is ultimately going to result in an increased value creation in some cost, in some basis or the other, where it could essentially end up in reduced coordination costs. It could typically have better take rates for the protocol, or the features that are kind of being developed. And what you can then kind of think about is essentially allocating preferentially these flows that come from these particular activities to the financiers or the LP interests in these particular vehicles. And if these activities don't pan out the way that they are supposed to, it kind of gives people or LPs the chance to kind of lay claim to the underlying token to kind of then maybe direct governance for the broader protocol to act in a direction that is more suited for the ecosystem to develop better. And the idea would also be that you could potentially start thinking about splitting or tokenizing governance rights and associate those to these LP interests, where they have a much more stronger say in guiding the outcome of this particular activity that they've been financing, but not having as much of a say in the broader development of the ecosystem and other activities that the ecosystem is kind of embarking upon, and kind of using that as a basis to cleanly segregate and understand people's interest and the interest in governing which part of the ecosystem that they care about. And so the benefits that this really brings are things that I just touched upon. So it's primarily capital efficiency, but it kind of fulfills needs for teams kind of embarking and working in a way that is much more fluid and kind of could drive more working capital needs for the same. It's non-dilute. It's obviously non-dilutive. It's much better for people who obviously are long-term believers in the growth of an ecosystem and want to kind of reap the benefits of participating from the same. And so the idea is that once we kind of have these notions in place, it actually lends itself to a much better understanding of real cost of capital that we're kind of seeing in these teams in terms of what a team really needs in a Web3 in a crypto native Web3 ecosystem to kind of build and iterate upon a feature and show that it could actually lead to value accrual to not just that product or feature that is kind of being built, but also towards the ecosystem as a whole, and kind of then using that as a basis to not just expand upon the fixed pool of governance tokens that you kind of have, but then using that as a basis to kind of tap into other forms of financing, like some of which could essentially be structured as a debt-based offering. And all of this typically begs the question as to whether we are at a point for using such structures. I'd say the short answer is no in some cases, but there are a lot of very encouraging signs that I kind of touched upon before, in the form of some protocols actually having attributable on-chain cash flows, and we're also kind of seeing notions in the space around consolidation for talent, for assets and liquidity, for the different kinds of services that you might essentially need to be offering to your customers at one point. And so, and all of this actually lends itself to a much neater outcome in terms of showcasing showcasing firstly transparency in your operations, and also kind of thinking really hard about the notion of enabling people to have a clear separation of concerns in terms of the core levers of economics and control. And this also kind of lends itself very neatly to the notion of having different kinds of tranches or different kinds of exposure and backstops, given you know the inherent risk in kind of developing new features that a particular ecosystem sees on a daily basis. Pretty sure you're aware of all of the issues that kind of come up with increasing the surface area of smart contracts, or even some part of the backend infrastructure that you associate with the same. And so this might potentially be a neater way to contain some part of those risks. Although I guess we'll really have to see if this kind of pans out. But I'd say that we are in the nascent stages of kind of getting to these systems. And so it's going to be very nice to actually see teams iterate upon some of these notions and actually see if they can attract interest from different stakeholders in the space. I guess I probably need to also mention the role of other intermediaries and stakeholders in all of these processes, where you really need to have, I guess, the notion of credit facilities and protocols who are obviously willing to underwrite and lend capital against newer forms of reserves. And so, and this would have to ensure that it's not just assets that are new or have been around for a while, but also taking into account protocols and needs of developers who are newer to the ecosystem, and taking on the capability of underwriting the offering with their own reserves and with a few backstops set in place. The other thing that we really need is getting a lot of education and ensuring that there is a right distribution for these kinds of assets, and making sure that they find their way to the right kinds of people in some regard. So with you kind of have now at your control the capability to parameterize a lot of things that people might choose to care about, given time preference, given governance preference, given economic outcomes. And so you kind of have the capability to do this in a much better fashion. And so if we start using that in a much better way, I think there's going to be an interesting outcome that could typically be involved for multiple stakeholders. And you obviously need more liquid markets to ensure that there is treatability and you don't associate like a steep liquidity discount. And you also need better analytic tooling for attribution of cash flows and also getting an account of the spends that protocol teams have been doing towards these particular outcomes. And most importantly, one of the things that's missing right now is the lack of what one might call a risk-free rate in the market, and also kind of thinking about things that could ultimately act as a backstop in the same way that I guess a U.S. Treasury bond does in some regard. And so we still need to kind of get to that point. Staking-based derivatives might do that. We might also get to more interesting risk-free rates through the utilization of state channels, be it in terms of the Lightning networks or the Lightning pool, or in the form of what Connext is building with their vector framework to kind of allow for inter-layer 2, layer 1 interoperability and expressing or allowing liquidity providers to kind of have an inherent cost of capital that they have or need to actually provide the capability to transition funds from one ecosystem to another. But really, I think this notion is still pretty untested, and this might go well, this might not. So we kind of need to see if there is a market demand and how we can actually start thinking about building up something along those lines. But I think if we do get there, I think it's going to be super interesting, because we actually have the capability to form newer forms of better credit facilities and building up a much more transparent and much better rating system in that regard, as opposed to what one might see in the existing financial setup. We actually now have the capability to tap into multiple forms of risk-free rates that are slowly coming up. Similar to IBOR, we could have an ILOR. And I guess the most interesting thing is that we now potentially have the capability to offer newer forms of structured products, things that are much easier for people to understand and kind of directly use, and thereby widening the capital base of people who are participants in the ecosystem, and actually giving them things that they are comfortable being exposed to in some sense. And so that is something that I feel is a very exciting notion of how people can work in a more crypto native, in a new open interoperable web, thanks to the notion of a uniform settlement layer that kind of serves as the base truth for all of this. But yeah, with that, I think I'm pretty much done with what I had to ramble about, and I'm happy to kind of get to answer any questions, or just actually have people reach out if they have any concerns. So
great. Well, thank you very much, Praneeth. I feel like that was a lot of information.
Sorry, I can't seem to hear you, Cindy, but I'm not sure if that's an issue on my front.
Can you guys hear me? Hello? All right. So yeah, that was a lot of information. I hope that some of it via osmosis. We do have time for one more question. And
I don't know.
hello?
I just can't seem to hear anything, but it's all right. But feel free to DM me on Twitter or anything. Should be good to actually get any feedback.
All right.
Can you hear me,
Well, thank
Praneeth?
you very much.
Yes, I can hear you fine, Eden.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay, cool. I could hear you, Cindy, but for some reason you two aren't connecting to one another. So I can just ask the questions, if you don't mind, that we have here.
I don't know if there's an issue with my network, but your voice is breaking up a lot.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can.
Okay, cool. So we have just a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
Go on.
Awesome. So firstly, thank you for your talk. I really appreciate kind of the perspective that maybe people aren't bringing to the space, which is kind of coming with a more well-rounded approach to how these things will get funded in the future. So to ask you the question, if you could disrupt any industry outside of blockchain with more transparent and flexible debt-based financing, which one would you pick and why?
Any industry side blockchain? Huh. That's going to be an interesting one, I think. I'd probably have to look at. I'd probably have to go back to some part of the to where I actually hail from, and start thinking about some part of the issues and the market issues that we typically see funding a few cooperative structures back home in India, which is where I hail from in some regard, where it typically gets very hard for some part of these cooperative structures to kind of tap into forms of credit-based financing outside of government funding, thanks to the notion that it's really hard to kind of actually get more data about these structures, although they actually end up being things that are actually pretty good in terms of ensuring livelihood for people, ensuring that processes are actually done in a way that's much more environmentally friendly. And so it's a pity that it's only government backed, but I think forms of credit financing would actually be super helpful for something along those lines. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that insight, and hopefully these different things can align and then help fuel one another soon. Thank you so much for joining us today, Praneeth.
No, thank you for having me.
Talk soon.
Yes.
Cindy, I'll let you take it away.
Well, it is now time for me to introduce the next speaker. And this next speaker that I am introducing is a prominent leader within the blockchain community. He's a serial visionary who has pioneered several software projects that are considered indispensable and highly forked throughout this space. He's leading the organization behind libp2p, DRAND, and even to brand new benchmarking environments like TestGround. And of course, the protocols that we know are set to change the way we store and transmit information as we know it. On behalf of ChainSafe and our viewers, I'm extremely pleased to present the founder and CEO of Protocol Labs, visionary entrepreneur and engineer Juan Benet. So Juan, you can just turn on your camera and share your screen.
Hey, can you hear me? Yes? No?
You're all good.
All right, awesome. Hey, thank you so much for that super kind introduction. Really excited to be here. Super stoked for the conference. It's been really amazing to hear all of these conversations and get to ask questions and be part of actually bring together the community in this way. I think 2020 has been super hard for tons of people around the world, and it's just really great to actually get to spend time together and reinvigorate our projects and our lives with the missions that we're pursuing together. So thank you so much for bringing us together and for organizing this. Cool. So I'm gonna share my screen. I'm a bit new to this interface, so bear with me. I think it's this one. Should be able to see that. Can you see that? Great. I think so. Cool. So I'm going to try going full screen. Can you? Nope, that's not going to work. Great. 1 second. Let me see if I'll like hack this by making it. Sorry for the. Let's roll with that. How's that? Sweet. Great, but now the control doesn't work. All right, here. I'll try to play one more time, and then I won't be able to see the chat, so that's kind of what sucks about it.
So you're muted right now, Juan, and I don't see your screen share. Oh, it's back. Can't hear you still. AirPods to the rescue. Can't hear you yet. So to let you know, you have all the time that you need. All right, cool. So while we wait for him to refresh the page, why don't you guys drop where you're listening in from? Because I want to see.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you perfect.
And now just refresh. That's the cool thing about the web.
Love it.
Great. So let's share screen again. Great. And I'm guessing you can see that. Quick confirmation. Great. Awesome. Great. So I'll chat about the next wave of Web3. What this talk is kind of about is I want to give us the time and space to reconnect with why we're doing what we're doing. So the first part of this talk is gonna go into, it's gonna remind ourselves what Web3 is about and why it matters. Then I'll give an update about Filecoin and what's happening in with the ecosystem, and then I'll kind of have some parting thoughts for what next year and the upcoming kind of short-term future might look like for the space. And yeah, so let's go through it. I love starting a lot of these conversations about Web3 with just reconnecting with why a lot of us are working on what we're doing, because in our day-to-day, when we're working on a project or we're working on an application and so on, it's so easy to lose sight of the bigger picture and to just get so focused on kind of the day-to-day on the simple applications that we're working on the current problems of the day, that we can easily just lose sight of why these individual pieces connect up to a much bigger picture. So the claim here, and what I think I think a lot of people in Web3 will agree, is the internet is the world's most important technology today, and Web3 is bringing a bunch of important principles. And the internet itself is just a part of computing as a bigger phase transition for humanity. So in the last 80 years, computing has radically transformed who we are and how we operate. Right now, we are able to be together in this virtual room and spending time with each other, even though we are all far apart and so on. We walk around with supercomputers in our pockets. We walk around with now screens in our laptops and so on, and in our phones, and soon in our headsets. And more and more computing is turning us into a very different species, and it's happening very quickly. So 80 years is not a long time. If you now think of all of the advances and different pieces of technology that came in to facilitate this transition, and you start thinking about sci-fi books and even what you know about technology and what's coming in the next few decades, you can extrapolate a very, very different future outlook. So today we have billions of humans and trillions of computers working together, deeply integrated, and so on. And we have this really amazing computing platform where most of our human activity is suddenly is more and more mediated by this application platform. And what's beautiful about this is this whole setup, there's massively equalizing force that the internet came to introduce, which is that because it's built on open standards and it is not really locked down, and it was built by a network of hackers who really cared a lot about the properties of these platforms and the properties of being able to upgrade the system and really letting anybody contribute their version of the of computing and the internet. It yielded a system that we can change dramatically. We can grant people whole superpowers by writing an application or writing a new system and a new piece of infrastructure, deploying it to the world, and if people use it, then they get that superpower. It's truly amazing, and we live it day to day, so it's kind of commonplace, and it's so easy to disregard and so easy to take for granted. But it really is an amazing, completely magical environment that we live in, where we can grant these amazing upgrading superpowers to other humans by just getting together and writing software. And very fundamental changes are coming ahead. So there's many different kinds of interfaces that are that we're playing around with and improving, things like AR and VR, brain machine interfaces and whatnot. And then there are, of course, a whole slew of changes coming with all of the AI advances, from very specialized AIs to potentially AGI and robotics in the future. So when you kind of sit in 2020 and you look back and you think, well, computing has dramatically changed us in the last 80 years, and we're a very different group of humans today than we were in 80 years ago, and you kind of start thinking about what's going to happen in the next 80 years and the remainder of the century, very big changes are coming. It's not clear exactly what's going to happen and what the sequence might be, or when things might happen and so on. But it is pretty clear that in a short time span, we'll undergo another dramatic transformation, and likely much more impactful than the last 80 years. So I think that if the last 80 years are template to go by, I think the transformation will be much deeper in the next 80. So where does that put us? Well, today most of the computing infrastructure that we have is though it's very open and malleable, and you can deploy and improve a bunch of systems, it doesn't have a set of critical properties that allow you to trust the infrastructure. So the internet, which was first the wires and the connectivity framework, gave rise to the web, which became the static distribution medium for a lot of information and applications. And that led to kind of this read-write interactive Web 2.0. And Web 2.0 has a pretty significant flaw, which is, because the advertising model is a big part of the picture, it created an environment where this amazing superpower, sets of superpowers and supercomputers connected everywhere with hardware and cameras and microphones everywhere, contributed to building the most crazily effective surveillance system and tracking system ever devised, right? And given computing and given how it works and so on, it's very straightforward that you would land at something like this. But now the question is, how do we upgrade our systems to introduce the properties that we need to make sure that we end up with safe environments? So the really important thing to do here is make sure that we have this phase transition in the web, where we go from this Web 2.0 world that is read-write interactive and very powerful, and we introduce a set of very important properties to establish rights and to establish trustability, establish trust in the system through verifiability. So that's the big thing that Web3 is doing. All of the different kinds of primitives and systems that we're coming up with are all in one way or another always coming back to trust, adding through very different kinds of cryptographic primitives or game theory or incentive structures and so on. We're bringing verifiability to our systems and our networks and getting rid of intermediaries, making things more long-term safer and so on. Now, of course, each new wave of computing brings a lot of chaotic environments and all kinds of new potential problems and so on. So I strongly encourage you to think through what you're building as well, and make sure that what you're making isn't necessarily accidentally introducing other kinds of problems. And problems will come, and we'll have to solve them. So some of the values that you can think about when you're building Web3 oriented things are, this is kind of my stab at it. I think it would be a really good idea to kind of collect together the Web3 values and put them in some website somewhere. And of course, our communities will disagree. There'll be a lot of contention with some of these. Even even with a list this small, you can probably find many Web3 people that kind of disagree on some of these. But I think it's very useful to at least have a shape of the problem here. We kind of operate today in a world that has a lot of de facto freedom of speech and freedom of assembly through the digital medium, but that may not last. That may change. Many different kinds of power structures will benefit from an internet that is much more controlled and much more where borders spring up and where people can't actually communicate freely. So in our time, we will have to fight a number of fights to preserve this freedom and to hopefully lock it into the infrastructures that we use. Now, beyond that, there's all kinds of things that we don't fully have yet. So freedom of transaction, that's something relatively new. We're getting there, but it's not quite it's not pervasive yet. Most of the people connected to the internet don't yet have this set of properties. And there's things beyond that, from being able to have sovereign storage, in a sense, where you can fully own and control the data that you produce and share and so on, and you don't have to have it be subservient to some other kind of massive data monopoly or something like that. And to then being able to write these amazing application superpower things with verifiability embedded in them, so that when you go and grant that superpower to other parties, they don't have to trust you, and you don't accidentally end up in a position where you could actually subvert the entire system by abusing that privilege, or somebody using your systems, right? So the very simple example is all of the manipulation that's going on in the world through the social networks right now is a perfect example of what happens when you build a super powerful system and then attackers start using it, right? So Cambridge Analytica using Facebook kind of thing is the classic example, but there's so many more things that could happen. So I hope that the big takeaway here is these really important values are what we're at the core of so many of our applications and our systems. So really encourage you to think through them and think through which ones you really care about and you and your groups want to make sure exist in the world. So Web3, if you're not, I think for now most people will be pretty familiar with the terminology and so on. I tend to think that this is a combination of these three broader groups of broader efforts: the decentralized web, blockchains, and linked data. And I've spoken before about this. I kind of think of this as a talk that continues these other talks I've given in the last few years. Yeah, you can. I won't speak as deeply into some areas as I did then. So now I want to maybe describe how we think about these values and we think about the projects that we're making. So we are working on a number of things that and ProClap's working on a number of things that contribute some are trying to affect some of the changes that I'm talking about here. And in reality, we contribute to a lot of projects. So we probably help out on a number of the things here on the screen. And this is, again, a snapshot that I took many years ago. There's a ton of other projects here that aren't well represented. But we're lucky enough to have started a few. And I kind of want to describe sort of how they connect, right? So, and so over time, we'll have more projects and whatnot. But these connect into what we sort of describe as a stack that helps upgrade the web and the application platform to have a number of those properties. The reason we ended up separating them into different projects, and we ended up with kind of like a word soup of acronyms and so on, is that each one of these pieces introduces a different set of properties into the network, and it is best to kind of create these things in a modular way, in a reusable way, where many other people can use the tech, and you don't have to kind of build these monolithic systems and applications that over time will kind of just give way, right? So a good example of this is if you look back to the peer-to-peer wave of the early 2000s, so many important things got built there. Think of BitTorrent and Skype and so on, but they were monolithic applications, and so it was very difficult to reuse those systems for other things. And so kind of one of the goals that we've had along the way is to do the extra work to go and modularize and break up pieces so that other people can use them. Now, peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer is so that we can have a kind of interoperable peer-to-peer stack. There's all kinds of problems that I'm describing that come from not having a really good networking layer, and so that's kind of what LibTV hopes to solve. And this is LibTV is broadly adopted in the Web3 space, and it enables a kind of interoperability across systems that's super flexible and super nice, that people have not really pushed on that much, right? So now, in the last year and a half, we've now finally gotten these major blockchains to move over to using LibTV. And now that we have this common stack and common framework of all these pieces, now is when we're going to start to see people writing tools and applications and so on that help bridge this world. And so we hope that it'll contribute to interoperability and convergence of the stack. We're building IPFS because we think the web itself should work peer-to-peer. You should be able to move around the content. You should be able to address it wherever you want. You shouldn't rely on one central party defining what the content is. The content should be defined by its cryptographic hash and so on. And this, in that simple kind of statement of saying, hey, it would be great to have content on the network be addressed by cryptographic hash to get that integrity and verifiability that comes from that, is kind of where the whole IPFS project comes from. And it's a larger effort with a lot of different folks in a pretty large community, and many other systems that use it, right? So the entire, you can think of embedding the entire Falcon ecosystem within the IPFS ecosystem, and so on, and many other groups. The big thing is to upgrade the application platform, specifically browsers and mobile and so on, and the connectivity layers between whenever we're exchanging static information, to make sure to address it in a content address way, and to move it around with a protocol that facilitates peer-to-peer distribution, as opposed to kind of going through the rails of a few centralized parties. And really, this is definitely watch the IPFS talk from earlier in the week, but we've made a lot of progress over the years in getting a lot of traffic going through IPFS, and also browser adoption. There's a really cool important upgrade to this, where I think Brave will now pass Opera fairly soon, because now they're embedding IPFS itself in the browser, right? So a whole full node will come into Brave, and so expect this to totally change. This slide is also pretty old, and Brave is now kind of overtaking Opera here. And we're building Filecoin to create an environment where we can back up and serve all of this data in a crypto native way, where you can have anybody providing services to the network and be paid in cryptocurrency for it. And you can build applications that you can deploy into the network and sort of walk away from. So Filecoin is a very large system. It's a like IPFS and like LibTP, it expanded to a broader set of goals and so on. I won't explain the whole thing here, but I'll give you kind of a glimpse into the picture. You can think of many different layers to Filecoin and different components of the system. And the mission is to create a decentralized and efficient and robust foundation for humanities information, which is really the hope for a long-term application foundational layer that isn't really controlled by anybody, that is sort of like the internet, that is sort of like the web itself, where you can just rely on the system working, and you can kind of address all your data with IPFS and back up your content with Filecoin, and then bet on it being there for the long term. Now, some of the problems that Filecoin addresses, things like making sure the cloud can be decentralized, try to optimize the system by introducing markets, deal with kind of the problems of data monopolies, and so on, destroying applications or changing them too much when you don't want them to change, and so on. You can think of now a more permanent layer for data being available. And yeah, one of the key features that Filecoin brings to the table that no other cloud does is it gives you cryptographic proofs that verify that the storage is there over time. And so that's a really key property that nobody really does yet, and that's a really useful primitive for the future. The broader picture is, you can imagine kind of the world right now. Most of the information that we consume and most of the information that we store and so on is grouped into a few large-scale data centers, and it would be really great to transition into something like this, where storage providers can add from many different organizations come together and form a market that can back up our data. And so really kind of turning a market that sort of like looks like this, where, well, the scale here is off. Really, the top three are, the vast majority of the traffic and the storage and so on, and really combine it with a model kind of like Airbnb's, where really you enable the smaller players to compete with the large ones, right? So if in the Airbnb world you were trying to rent out your room and compete with a hotel chain, that was pretty difficult. But once you created a market, that became easy. And so that in similar way, imagine being kind of some of the smaller storage providers that today have to compete with each other and the big players, and really thinking of the rest as a market that can come together and be much more efficient and robust. So another word, I'm coming close on time here. I'm gonna kind of like blaze through a little bit of this. I've recorded this in other settings, and so I'll drop a link later to a talk where I go through a lot of this in great detail, and also Colin in our team gave an even more fleshed out version of this update that is really amazing. Really encourage you to check it out. The biggest news is that Filecoin is live. The network is alive and kicking. There's, we have a blockchain. We are moving around a ton of data, and past 1 exabyte, which is a huge amount of storage. We are booting up this storage economy with miners and clients and developers and so on, and getting the entire economic flows of producing this cloud storage and using it to work with a crypto native system and asset and so on. And the facility, there's a whole pretty significant scale of facilities coming together. A lot of different companies around the world. Amazing uptake in Asia and China specifically. It's been amazing to see the adoption there just blow up tremendously. It's been really great, and the road ahead for the future is expanding that out to other areas of the world. The network size is, it's pretty big. Like there's really kind of like need to update this chart, but it's in about 3 months we got to 1.2 exabytes, which is a massive amount of storage, and so this really starts hitting cloud scale. And so now we can actually think about competing with those environments. Now, of course, it'll take quite a long time to deal with all of the feature sets that industry really needs. So this will be a pretty long slog, similar to cloud taking many years to go from kind of being available, AWS being available or something like that, to actually consuming most of the market usage and so on. So it's a long-term thing for sure, but it's really amazing that in a very short time we actually now have the scale to be able to do that. So the ecosystem is growing. You should watch the talks that I mentioned. They go into detail into a lot of the activity that's going on. Various different really cool applications, all kinds of stuff that I want to get a chance to talk to you about now. I did want to give a massive shout out to the whole ChainSafe team for being phenomenal partners in building out this network. So, probably about a year or so ago, I don't remember, maybe longer, probably it's been kind of a blur. We got to chatting about the possibilities of working together on Filecoin and ChainSafe building an implementation of the protocol and a bunch of other things. And they took a huge bet on the ecosystem, and they've been really phenomenal to work with in so many ways. So really, thank you, folks, for being a great, sharing and building this amazing new resource and network with us. It's been fantastic to work together, and really all of us from PL and from many other organizations in the Filecoin ecosystem just really love working with you and think it's a look ahead for a really bright future together. So thank you so much for taking the plunge, and here's to many more years ahead. So yeah, thank you. And with that, I'm gonna move out of this because I think we're at the time. The kind of like remaining thing I wanted to sort of leave you with is that there's a pretty big wave of Web3 applications that's going to appear because we're seeing the emergence of a bunch of different next generation blockchains that are kind of testing the waters, Filecoin is coming to the picture with a vast amount of storage. There's interoperability that's going to come together, and so the applications that are going to get built in between now and say middle of next year are going to be this super massive wave in Web3, right? So if we think of it kind of like when Ethereum first started, that it took about kind of 6 to 18 months or so for the first generation of applications to really come into the scene and really hit in a really big way and kind of have the first big waves of the Ethereum applications. That's sort of happening now. People are currently building the next generation applications on top of these next generation systems that just deployed. So it's a super exciting time. So if you're not in deep into the weeds of a lot of these systems and projects, now's an amazing time to get involved. And there's all kinds of things going on, from hackathons to accelerators to lots of funding in the space to help build projects, both in terms of grants and in terms of investment into companies and whatnot. So really an amazing time to get involved. Great, I'll pause here. If there's time for questions, happy to take them, but I also don't want to take the next speaker's time. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan. That was amazing. It's fascinating to get general talks as Web3 is changing the paradigm of the internet. It's great to have an overview for people, and also how these things like modularity are going to change the game. So let's just relax and answer all these questions, because they're all great questions. So I'm going to start with the ones with the most votes. When originally building IPFS, how many of the tools that ended up being built were evident as necessary at the time? And how many got organically added to the stack of tools as the project grew?
Great question. So I think probably now I would say the majority of the tooling around IPFS is organically developed. That said, from the beginning, maybe I'll mention a few core things. So the networking layer being a really big deal, which now eventually turned into the core of Liquid2P. That was kind of clear from the get-go. The fact that we would need something to do content routing in a scalable way was very clear from the beginning. It was clear that a DHT would sort of get us part of the way there and maybe work for a few years, but then break. And this is kind of where we are, where the DHT has served us pretty well for a number of years, but now we actually hit the scale where that's just not the right solution in the long term. Or we might make a new kind of DHT that might do it, but we might also explore other kinds of routing systems. Things like the gateway were always, from the beginning, part of the plan, and they stuck around and become very successful. I sort of expected that the browser integrations would have picked up more by now, or sorry, not the browser integrations, the tooling with JavaScript to make it an easy to deploy environment. It's pretty good, but I think more people are relying on the gateway than I think should be relying on JavaScript directly. And the browser integration is something that surprised me as to how fast they went. So I was expecting not really being considered by major browsers for 10 years, and it's really sort of been like 5. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. So was there anything that was totally unexpected that you needed to build straight away?
I think probably a big oversight in the initial design was we should have made PubSub a much bigger part of the picture from the get-go. So that's one piece. Oh, and then IPLD. So the entire IPLD layer came too late. So that, if I were to go back and kind of introduce a set of ideas into the beginning, would be all the IPLD layer of things: how to model the content, how to represent data structures, make it a really flexible layer, and so on. The first design of IPFS was very rigid into just had a Unix-based file system, and that ended up just creating a lot of layers of complexity that were probably unnecessary.
That's cool. That's great. So here's the next question. You have described DRAND as a fundamental building block of the internet, comparing it to NTP. What are the most exciting things you want to see DRAND used for outside of blockchain and leader re-election?
Great question. So I think a randomness beacon is one of these primitives that so many applications need, and they sort of solve in their own kind of haphazard way, and it's a really painful thing to do. And if we manage to build this layer that everybody can trust will just be there, that'll start seeping into a ton more applications. I mean, the use of randomness is ever present, and most sources of randomness are not very good, and people make mistakes about this all the time. So I think maybe to part of the question's point, like what is sort of in the near term, I think blockchains will be probably the biggest adopters because the need for good randomness is so high, and they're willing to trust new systems and so on more, whereas say larger scale industries may not. That said, I think I think we'll see what happens over the next year or two as the proof of stake blockchains arrive, as Filecoin relies on DRAND. It'd be amazing to see another blockchain start using it for consensus, or lotteries. So I think now lotteries with fair and unbiasable randomness would be great.
Yeah, that's cool. I actually can't think of something outside of blockchain that needs randomness as badly as we need. So, all right. So there's two questions that are quite similar. I think I'll try to collapse them, but maybe I'll ask the first question. If the whole world started using Filecoin tomorrow, would there be any blockers for that amount of data needed to be stored?
Yeah, so I think the biggest blockers are just interface tooling and getting the flows from clients to miners working super well. So the network is evolving in the following stages. We first building the protocol, then getting miners used to the protocol and so on, then actually launching the network and building a bunch of capacity. That's sort of the stage we're in now. And we're starting the next stage, which is getting clients onboarded, starting to use a lot of the flows, getting a bunch of utility out of the network, and then scaling clients. So think of now as kind of the pioneering moment where a lot of new applications and new users are starting to build their applications on top of Filecoin, and it'll take a while to flesh out all the UX and dev tooling that should really be there, and especially retrieval. So I think it's really awesome to work together on the retrieval market. That's one area that I think will be super valuable for really enabling everybody to use Filecoin. Meaning, if everybody stored their data on Filecoin right now, we would start congesting the traffic to the miners very quickly. So the miners right now can serve it to everybody because the traffic on retrieval is not that high. As soon as that scales up, that will need a much more CDN style system, which we can build over the next year, and the timing on that should be fine.
Yeah, that's a great and also predictable answer. But also personally, for me, I think one thing that gets me super excited about the Filecoin ecosystem is the verified data and people who verify the data. So it'd be interesting if we all woke up tomorrow and everything was stored on Filecoin. And where do we start verifying?
Yeah, so by the way, congratulations on the awesome launch. Super stoked about the product, and really look forward to using it. And it'd be amazing to see the Files product have that verifiability be clear to the user, right? So this is not something that most users care about yet or don't think about, but it would be cool to see maybe the history of a file and like you have the verifiability over time, right? So I don't know if any user would actually want this feature today. So maybe no need to build it if nobody cares about it, but on a personal use basis, it would be really nice to see kind of verifiably when a file got introduced or published or reshared and so on. This might be more valuable to communities. So communities, that's when that kind of verifiability becomes super important. Knowing when a data set entered the picture, when a specific piece of data came online, and knowing that data is being kept around, that verifiability for communities really matters. So think of also being able to see the mutating history of important data. So if you see a newspaper article change over time, making that verifiable, and exactly when that happened, and knowing that what information was there and what are they citing and referencing, and what is the mutability on those things, like that entire the web of media and its change, and making that permanent, easily accessible, and verifiable, like that I think is going to be a really valuable use of verifiability.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it links into data economies like to import a little bit of Glenn Weil's work into here. I think that verifiability would really matter over there.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Juan. This was an amazing presentation.
Thank you
and
so
on
much.
behalf of ChainSafe and our viewers, this was great.
Thank you so much. Great to hang out. Thanks for having me, and see you around.
Yeah, see you around. All right, guys. So we got a couple minutes break, and then we'll be coming back to talk about blockchain governance.